I'm Iain Dale. It's 1 minute past 8. We have one of the best looking panels we've ever had on the programme, which is an incentive for you to watch us on Global Player. You can see if my judgment is absolutely correct, because we have former Labour Home Secretary Jacqui Smith with us, co-presenter of the For the Many podcast. Emma Woolf is a broadcaster, journalist and author. Annabel Denham is Director of Communications at the Institute for Economic Affairs. And Jonathan Liss is a political commentator. They're going to give you their words of wisdom on all the questions, all the wonderful questions that you're going to be asking over the next hour. If you'd like to come on the programme, it's 0345 6060 973.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. The first question comes from David on a text. It says, what is the IEA? Is it the Institute for Erotic Art, perhaps? Could you clear that up, Annabel?
Delighted to, Ian. Thank you. It's the Institute of Economic Affairs.
Well, there you go. Oh, I never know whether to say of or for, but I think I got it wrong, didn't I? Right, let's go to the first real question. It's from Vicky in Hounslow. Hello, Vicky.
Hi, good evening, Ian.
Hi.
Hi. The question I have for this panel is, following the solution that Boris Johnson's handpicked chancellor was holding a green card, had a non-dom wife and in-laws who conducted business with Vladimir Putin, a trip to the Ukraine seems like a power play.
I couldn't understand a word of that because the line is terrible. We'll get you back on the line in just a second. Let's go to David in Enfield. Hello, David.
Good evening, everybody.
Hi.
Does the panel think that all government ministers should be required to publish their annual tax returns together with an audited statement of assets and liabilities? I'm asking this in the context of the Sunak-Javid controversy.
Annabel Denham, do you think that all politicians, all ministers should publish their tax returns?
I think that all ministers should be subject to the same requirements as workers across our economy. I don't see why there should be a different rule for them than there is for the rest of us, though we've seen plenty of that throughout the coronavirus pandemic. This certainly seems to be a story that has got legs. It's running on, and it's becoming increasingly uncomfortable for the Chancellor of the Exchequer. The moves that he's made in the last few days seem to be making the situation worse than they do better. But yeah, that's ultimately.
Of course, in America, certainly the president and presidential candidates publish their tax returns.
Trump never did.
Actually, you're right, he didn't, did he?
No, it's not compulsory.
I don't know whether senators or members of the House of Representatives have to. Jonathan?
I don't think that we need to go to the extent of publishing tax returns. What I do think is that there should be a lot more transparency in general over ministers' income. And we saw with the whole Owen Paterson scandal a few months ago that there is a real public appetite to clamp down on ministers' outside income. I think there's a widespread...
Ministers can't...
outside income. I think there's a widespread appetite to clamp down on second jobs. When it comes to ministers, I think that certainly their tax status and the history of their tax status should be in the public domain, as you know, as Javid and Sunak have and their families have done. I do think that the spouse is also absolutely necessary because it's part of your family income.
Even junior ministers, or just cabinet ministers?
I mean, I think obviously there'd have to be a series of rules, but the fundamental principle, if you like, is that if you are involved in setting out policy, there should be total transparency over your private interests and affairs. I think that should be agreed by all sides of the political spectrum.
Jacqui?
Well, we discussed this on the For the Many podcast this weekend, didn't we, Iain? And came, I think, to the correct conclusion that publishing your tax returns somehow or another had a slightly un-British feel about it. So I don't think that politicians should be expected to do that. But as Jonathan says, one of the difficulties in this situation is it doesn't feel to me as if Rishi Sunak has been completely open in terms of his declarations of interest about the tax situation that his wife was in. And if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer and you are making decisions about non-dom status with respect to taxation, and it isn't clear to everybody who's scrutinising those decisions that your family will be benefiting potentially.
But to be fair to him, he hasn't made any of those decisions, has he?
No, but
there's been no reforms that he's introduced.
I think he put forward, as I understand it, he put forward as part of the finance bill proposals around non-dom status. And of course, that it's his job to make decisions about the tax treatment of those with a non-dom status. And because he chose to, he says, oh, well, I made all the declarations that I should have done. But it's a strange ministerial declaration that only the most senior civil servants know about, and that when the public gets to know about it, you have to launch a leak inquiry because you didn't really want everybody to know about it in the first place. If you're declaring your interests, it's so that everybody can see that you're not acting in a way that benefits you or your family's interests, and he's failed that test.
Emma Woolf.
Okay, let's be clear. He's done nothing illegal, but it's extremely ethically and morally dubious. It's extremely slippery behaviour that we've been seeing from Rishi Sunak, and I think his career is over. I don't think he's going to save his skin. Clearly knows he's done something not particularly to be proud of, because otherwise why would his wife have changed her mind? Why would he be? And is anyone else irritated out there that we are now going to be paying for Lord Geit's time and resources and expenses?
Well,
no doubt.
What he's there for, to be
Well,
honest.
fine, but why is he
Can't have
being
him twiddling his thumbs?
That's fine by me. He can twiddle his thumbs.
Actually, at the moment, I don't think he is twiddling his thumbs.
No, I think he's got quite a lot on his plate. But why is Rishi Sunak, nominating himself to be investigated by the independent ethics advisor at, considerable expense to us to try and clear Rishi Sunak's name when it's his own family's affairs that we are... I mean, it's unprecedented for a Chancellor to be moving his belongings. I know he didn't live very much at number 11 anyway, but for his belongings to be moved out of number 11... I think he'll be in California, running Facebook very soon. I don't see him absolutely...
Fighting with Nick Clegg.
He's
possibly do that?
Absolutely. Fighting with Nick Clegg. He will never become Prime Minister now.
Well, I think that's quite an interesting point. Do any of you think that his political career now has effectively come to a halt? Can he recover from this?
I don't think he can recover. I think it's curtains for him. It's just, I think that some politicians are incredibly lucky and they convince themselves it's talent. Rishi Sunak came to the Exchequer just before COVID, and then he was responsible for an extremely popular policy. As soon as reality comes to light, as soon as he has to make political judgments, he's been completely exposed.
And the timing of this is, we are facing a real cost of living crisis. People are genuinely choosing between heating and eating. They're genuinely worried about supermarket prices. And you have someone who, I know it's not fair to judge people just because they're wealthy, but he's, worth what, 200 million himself, billions his wife is worth. This cannot. People really feel this, don't they? They really feel that I think he is out of touch.
You're right. People judge chancellors who benefit...
Cutting £20 off people's universal credit.
Exactly.
That matters to them.
They judge chancellors who aren't recognising a cost of living increase in the way in which you've said, and appear to have double standards, in the same way as they judge prime ministers who party whilst they're locked down because of COVID regulations. These things are very hard for the public to stomach, and for that reason, to answer your question, Ian, no, I think his clear ambitions to be prime minister are probably over now.
David, let's come back to you. I don't think any of our panel really agree with you that every minister should publish their tax returns. Why do you think they should?
Well, I totally disagree, because, the two fundamental principles of democracy are transparency and accountability. And these ministers are not normal employees. They're public servants funded by our taxes, making our laws. And I think we should have total transparency as to what vested interests they may hold that may affect the type of legislation that they introduce. I think it's 100% necessary.
Jacqui?
Well, but that's a different point. I agree with you about that, but you don't achieve that by publishing your tax returns. You achieve that by having a strong process of declaring your interests and those of your immediate family. And it's that I'm not convinced that Rishi Sunak has done in this particular case.
David, thanks for your call. Let's go back to Vicky, who's hopefully on a better line. Vicky, what's your question, please?
Hi, good evening. So following the revolution, that Boris Johnson's handpicked chancellor was holding a green card. His wife was non-dom status, and his in-laws conducted business with Vladimir Putin. To the Ukraine seems like a power play to fix his reputation and detract from the Partygate scandal. Does the panel agree Johnson can repair neither his image nor our trust in this using this one singular act?
Wow. Jacqui?
Well, to the first part of your question, Vicky, part of me thinks that the Prime Minister might actually be quite pleased that the shine has come off Rishi Sunak. I mean, there isn't even a question mark about whether or not the leak of his tax arrangements came from Number 10 in the first place. I didn't say it did, Ian. I just said there was a question mark about whether or not it did. I think... on the second part of your question, no, I don't think the Prime Minister can escape the inevitable criticism that has arisen, that I think will continue to arise, about the leadership that he showed within Number 10 in respect to parties over the course of the COVID pandemic. I think he was right to go to Ukraine. I think much of what he's done in terms of our policy with respect to Ukraine has been right. But it's not enough to overcome the fact that I think he shouldn't be the Prime Minister, and neither do lots of other people.
But if at the end of, I say the end of Partygate, we haven't reached the end of Partygate yet, but before the invasion of Ukraine, you could, if you said his leadership was at an all-time low in the polls, do you think that he started to climb the hill of popularity again?
Well, has he come out of the depths of the valley?
Because in the end, voters make a decision at election time. They balance up all the different things that a Prime Minister has done, the good and the bad, and come to a conclusion. Now, I would say he's in a better position today than he was 6 weeks ago.
I agree about that. But I think in the end, what voters will make a decision on is how they feel about the cost of living crisis and what the money in their pocket. And he has presided over a low-growth, high-tax economy. And in the end, voters will not be impressed by that, I don't think.
Jonathan Liss.
Well, as you know, Ian, I'm quite sceptical when it comes to the Prime Minister and his motives in general.
You hide it well sometimes.
Look, I agree that he was right to go to Kiev, obviously, and right to show support for Zelensky. It's a pity that there hasn't been more support shown to Ukrainian refugees, but that's a slightly different issue. But yes, clearly he is always got his eye on his career and his prospects, and to that extent,
every politician?
To that extent, the Ukrainian invasion has been very, sort of lucky for him, I suppose, in that he was 6 weeks ago facing an almost certain end to his career, and now he's enjoyed a slight bounce. But the polls still show a healthy Labour lead for the most part. There's a narrative developing among a lot of Conservative backbenchers that he's been rescued, but that is not the opinion that it seems to be shared by the British public. And I think that the important thing is that there are some Prime Ministers who the public makes up their mind about at some particular point. To the public, in a way, they never really made up their mind about Thatcher or Blair. They did make their minds up about Gordon Brown. The public made up its mind about Gordon Brown, for example, and Theresa May and John Major. And once they'd made up their minds, they never unmade those minds. So those Prime Ministers never recovered fully. And I think the same is true of Johnson. The public seems to have made up its mind about the Prime Minister, and I don't think that it would be unprecedented for him to come back from the depths of polling that he was experiencing a couple of months ago.
There was a poll out this afternoon that showed that Keir Starmer still has a negative approval rating. I mean, it's not as negative as Boris Johnson's, but I mean, that's not a good place for an opposition to be at this point in the electoral cycle.
It's not great, but I think that this is probably as good as it gets for Johnson, because you had the terrible Partygate story, which is not finished. Sue Gray has not actually released her report yet. There was a summary. Really, nothing of substance has come out yet, and it will, and there will be fireworks when it does, undoubtedly. And we still don't.
Have you seen it? How do you know there'd be fireworks?
Well, because there were enough fireworks in the précis, and that was kind of like sort of quite anodyne. So
there were enough fixed penalty notices.
Right, exactly, and the fixed penalty notices have not yet finished. Cressida Dick was hinting at that the other day. So this story is still going to run. And Ukraine, the invasion has happened. There was the initial boost, and it seems unlikely that he can sustain that. And so I think that Johnson is as good as it gets, and the economy is going to get worse. So I don't think his career can be saved.
Emma Woolf.
No, I really disagree. I think Boris has rehabilitated himself remarkably. And, think back to January. Think back to Sunak flying high, the golden boy, Prime Minister in waiting, all of that. And Boris Johnson was fighting for his life. He was fighting for political survival. And now there he is striding through Kyiv as practically a war hero with Zelensky. I think that Boris Johnson is back on top, and I think that he may well win the next election.
Well,
He's had a good war, hasn't he? As they used to say. He's had it's
he hasn't been
terrible.
fighting a war. I mean, it's very easy to be a war leader when you're not actually
Thank
at
you.
war.
I do understand that he was only there for half a day.
To quote
Do you understand
Boris's
that?
hero, give them the tools and they can finish the job.
But he wanted to be Winston Churchill all along, and this is his moment. And I'm amazed because during Partygate, I thought that he was over. I thought his career was over. And I think that he has come back. And I think people don't care about Partygate now. The sense is not that people care about Partygate as much as they care about Sunak.
I think it's a question of who he's redeeming himself to, because let's not forget 6 weeks ago we were talking about a leadership challenge. That looked like a very realistic prospect before Putin sent tanks into Ukraine. Now I think we need to look longer term past the May elections, in which the Conservatives may be decimated, to what's going to happen in 2024, which is the likely date of the next general election, if the 1p reduction in income tax that's scheduled for 2024 is anything to go by. And that will be a question, in my view at least, of how the cost of living crisis is going, how the NHS backlog is going. These are the issues that people care about. If they feel as though they are getting wealthier, that the sunlit uplands are somewhere on the horizon, then they will vote. Well, I think it's extremely unlikely. I agree with you, Ian. Then they will forget Partygate and vote on those issues, because fundamentally, I believe that it's still the economy stupid. It depends on how people feel about the prospects for the country, about the prospects for their own household finances. And if those are improving, then Boris Johnson will be redeemed regardless of
Quick retort from you, Vicky.
I do feel that as far as the lead up to all of these revolutions of his rise into seat, Boris Johnson's past reputation, even from when he was before Prime Minister, making the massive mistake of saying words that landed someone into an Iranian prison. This man has a track record of bad decisions and just deception all round, to then put him back into power following a massive just fail when it comes to finding sincerity in the way that he leads. It would just baffle me that we would just then succumb to another term with someone who cannot even, organize anything that's
He's too good at organising parties. That's the problem.
He could organise one in a brewery. That's the problem.
Just to be completely factual, he didn't land Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe in prison. She was already in prison, but I think he certainly didn't help in terms of getting her release. Vicky, thank you very much indeed. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call if you'd like to put a question to Jacqui Smith, Emma Woolf, Annabel Denham and Jonathan Liss. It's 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
21 minutes past 8 is the time. I'm tempted to ask the next question on what you just said there, Emma, on beard phobia, but I won't.
Organophobia.
Because we have got a wonderful question from Robbie in Streatham. Hello, Robbie.
Good evening, Ian. Before I actually go into the question, which I'll direct to Emily Woolf, I'd like to say that it's ironic that the gentleman that killed David Amis is being convicted at the moment, because there was an MP who was well worthy of running our country, I think. Although I'm not a Lib Dem supporter, I think that everything that's ever been said about him, speaks for itself.
He wasn't a Lib Dem, by the way. He was a Conservative.
Oh, was he really? Well, in which case
Yes.
then, sorry, I'm sorry about that. Sorry for my ignorance.
No, not at all. But I always correct people when mistakes come up, because I then get a load of texts and tweets saying, why didn't you correct them? So I didn't wish to be impolite, Robbie.
No, thank you very much for correcting me. Obviously, I wasn't on the ball. But
What's your
anyway,
question,
my question
please?
to Emily Woolf,
Emma.
Emma Woolf, is...
Sorry to correct you again.
Oh, right, OK, I'm not doing very well. At the time, the military intelligence services knew that Putin was going towards the Ukraine border with his tanks. I can't understand why they went to Putin to ask him what he was doing. Why did the world powers not just fly in all the military hardware necessary, right, into Ukraine, like planes and all the heavy-duty military hardware, to repel Putin in case he entered? And I guarantee you, in that particular instance, Putin would never have rolled one tank into Ukraine.
OK. I'm not quite sure why that question is directed to you, Emma, but we will put it to the rest of the panel as well. Far away.
Okay, well, I'll have a go, but I'm not privy to this international military secret information that you seem to think I am. It's a terrible situation, and I'm afraid I feel that Putin is completely unhinged and out of control. The atrocities that he's committing in Ukraine are beyond the pale. I'm that unfashionable thing, which is called a pacifist. I know people don't do that anymore, but I think that all military violence, I think all of this is absolutely horrendous, and I think we need to find some way to make it stop. I don't think we should be spending billions on killing people, whether they're Russian or Ukrainian.
You don't think that we should be supporting the Ukrainians in the way that we are?
Now that we're in this position, of course, we have to support Ukraine, but every day this goes on. Every day this goes on, there are children and women and, well, people, human beings being killed on both sides.
Well, there aren't women and children being killed on the Russian side, are there? The Russians are doing the killing of the women and children.
Yeah, I mean, there are human beings losing their lives on both sides. It's not that I don't... People seem to not care about Russian soldiers. I do. I mean, young men on both sides being killed is it's just a complete waste of human life.
Annabel?
Well, I think it's fair to say that we didn't anticipate, the Western Alliance did not anticipate how far Vladimir Putin would go with this war. And indeed, I think Vladimir Putin himself has been taken aback by the resistance that he's seen from the Ukrainian forces, and perhaps the lack of willingness and lack of welcome that he's had in certain regions of Ukraine. So I think that the first thing to say is that nobody really expected things to go as far as they have and to escalate as quickly as they have, which perhaps explains why it is that we didn't send more weaponry to the border, more troops to the border with Ukraine. But of course, the other side of this is that Russia is a nuclear power, and we have to be extremely careful about getting, or the US in particular, about getting into a shooting war with a nuclear power. And as Emma says, Putin has shown himself to be an irrational political actor. For a long time, I think we thought that he was a rational political actor who to some degree could be reasoned with, but the extent of this war suggests that he isn't. So I think it's a combination of needing to apply some caution. Of course, we, the West, have gone further than was expected as well. We've imposed economic sanctions that certainly I wasn't anticipating, such as blocking access to SWIFT and some of the sanctions that have been imposed on Russian banks and Russian oligarchs. So I think we're responding appropriately. Some of it is gesture politics, but gestures matter when there's a war on. So I think we're responding to a situation that's moving very, very quickly, and one that we didn't anticipate going as far as it has.
Jonathan.
I suppose the first thing to say about this is that in the run-up to the war, it would have been a PR gift to Putin to have troops flooding, not into Ukraine, obviously, but to the border, and to have mass...
I think the caller is suggesting that they should have gone into Ukraine at that point.
Right, okay, well, I don't think that would have been appropriate at that moment. I think it would have been the Russians would have seized on it to say, look at how aggressive the West is being, we need to defend ourselves, etc. So it's kind of a catch-22. But the more important point, I suppose, is that I don't think it would have stopped Putin from invading anyway, because this wasn't about NATO or anything. That's just a complete smokescreen. This was about a 19th century style imperial war of aggression in which a revanchist, irredentist leader, an ethno-nationalist, decided that he wanted to take back a country that used to belong to his country. I think that's why this war is so kind of easy to understand to people. I think that's why it sort of hit a nerve with so many people, because it's so easy to understand. It's such a clear historic wrong that has been perpetrated, and I don't think it could have been prevented by Western actions.
And Jacqui, given the fact that the intelligence for once was actually bang on here, was America and Europe in particular a little bit tardy in the response?
Almost certainly, yes. But can I just first of all say, Jonathan, what a splendid set of adjectives to describe Putin there. I think people will be rushing to their political science books in order to look those up. Not only were we tardy in our action, we were even more tardy than Robbie is suggesting, because in some ways, of course, the writing was on the wall in 2014 when Crimea was annexed in Ukraine. So essentially, Ukraine has been partially occupied since then. But for understandable reasons, as Annabel said, it is the case that this is the first war that is being fought since the Cold War. Well, the Cold War wasn't a war by definition, between those who potentially have nuclear weapons. So Russia has nuclear weapons. For NATO to have taken the sort of action that Robbie is implying here would have been potentially enormously risky at the time. It's clear that something more should have happened than did, but I think it would have been incredibly dangerous to put NATO weapons so directly into Ukraine at the point at which Rob is suggesting.
Do you think that's changed now, though, that we are now in a different ball game? Unfortunate turn of phrase maybe, but we're in a different part of the conflict where, given we weren't, even if Russia had invaded, I think most of us thought they would behave like an invader would behave, rather than commit the kind of atrocious war crimes they have. Does that make any difference to what we should be doing now?
Well, we also discussed this as well, didn't we, at the weekend, Iain? And
because we have nothing better to do with our weekends.
I think there is a distinction between the provision of considerably more weapons and more offensive weapons than we've provided up until this point. And I think that's what we should be doing. I think it's interesting in Germany that you're seeing a little bit of a split, actually, between the Greens and Scholz, the Social Democrat leader, about the Germans also providing more weaponry. But that's a different kettle of fish to saying, let's say, we should be sending forces directly into Ukraine. But I think all of us have been horrified by the way in which Putin has wholly failed. I mean, in one way we shouldn't be, because he has always failed to recognise the rules of international law and the basic decency of the world order. And therefore needs to be stopped.
More of your questions to come. 0345 6060 973. If you want to watch us, you can do so on Global Player. It's 8:30. Let's get the LBC News headlines with Andy Ivey.
Essex police say the two unarmed officers who tackled the killer of Conservative MP Sir David Amess have been given a bravery award. Ali Harbi Ali has been found guilty at the Old Bailey of his murder last year and preparing for acts of terrorism. The Wakefield MP Imran Ahmad Khan has been expelled from the Conservative Party after he was convicted of sexually assaulting a teenage boy. The victim, who's now 29, was forced to drink alcohol at a house in Staffordshire before he was attacked in 2008. Austria's Chancellor has become the first EU leader to meet the President of Russia since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine in February. Karl Nehammer says the talks didn't leave him optimistic and an offensive in eastern Ukraine is evidently being prepared on a massive scale. LBC weather, rain overnight and windy in the north. Tomorrow, showery rain for many, but some bright warm spells across parts of the south, a high of 18 degrees.
This is LBC.
Watching
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:33 on Cross Question. Jacqui Smith is here. Emma Woolf, broadcaster, journalist and author. Annabel Denham, Director of Communications at the IEA, and political commentator Jonathan Liss. Did you like how I assumed that everyone would know who you were without telling them who you were?
Yes, thanks.
Right, let's go to our next question. It's Khaled in Wimbledon. Hello, Khaled.
Good evening, Ian, and good evening, panel.
Hi.
If a by-election is held in the constituency of Wakefield, which is Red Wall, and the Conservatives were to lose, would that mean it's toast for Boris Johnson's premiership?
Now, the context for this is that a sitting Conservative MP has been found guilty of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old today at Southwark Crown Court. Now, he's appealing that, so let's all be mindful of that, I guess. But if he is sentenced to a prison sentence, and the judge has warned that he might well be, that would cause a by-election. Now, single by-elections, Jonathan Liss, actually don't mean an awful lot, do they?
I think some of them can be more important than others, obviously, and this one, if it does take place, will be what we might call box office, because it's so much will hinge on it for both main leaders. If Boris Johnson loses this, it is going to take him right back to where he was a couple of months ago with a lot of MPs, because let's not forget that Tory MPs are entirely ruthless in their calculations. They will keep Boris Johnson if they think he can possibly keep their seats for them. If they don't think that he is best placed to do that, then they'll dispatch him. That's literally the only calculation. And so if Johnson...
There's one caveat to that.
If there's anyone else who
there has to be a better alternative.
Right, exactly. And that's why it's convenient for Johnson that Sunak is now out of the picture. And that's why, expect some negative headlines about Liz Truss in the next couple of months if Number 10's as Machiavellian as they might well be. But the point is that if Johnson shows that he can't hang on to the seats the Tories won in 2019, that is going to sort of set the balance quite firmly against him for a lot of backbenchers. And so that might expedite his removal before the next election. But on the other hand, it's very, very important for Keir Starmer to win this. It's a must win for him, because if he can't win Wakefield, which was, a solid Labour seat. Mary Craig's seat. If he can't win that, which obviously Labour lost in 2019, then Labour is going nowhere near
she's
power.
On this programme in about a week's time.
Well, you can ask her what she thinks about it. But if Starmer can't win this, then he can't be Prime Minister. And so I'd expect him to kind of go back to where he was, sort of say 6 or 9 months ago, if he can't win this. And that's why it's an absolute must-win for both leaders.
Emma?
I don't think... Keir Starmer is just a nobody. He's an absolute nobody. Half of the British public think he's called Keith Starmer, don't they?
Well, on Twitter, maybe.
And the other half don't know who he is. So I think while the opposition is just so woefully weak, they've had open goal after open goal for months and months and months. I'm just staring at two Labour people. They've had months of a couple of years of open goals.
She didn't mean me, by the way.
And they have failed to score. And I think that Keir Starmer is a nothing.
Well, they did score over Partygate. I mean, Labour had a massive lead. Well, they had a massive lead in the polls. They still do.
Goal.
Yeah, fine, but it was an open goal. They scored.
You can only play what you got. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Amanda. Annabel. Where did Amanda come from?
I knew you did respond. I don't know which is more worrying, actually. I think we can't read too much into by-elections. I agree with Jonathan's point that the relationship that Boris Johnson has with a lot of Red Wall MPs is purely transactional. They don't believe that he can win for them as the fantastic political campaigner that many of them seem to believe him to be in 2024. Then they could start to turn against him. But I don't think a by-election is what's going to cinch it. And, I mean, if you look at what happened in Cheshire and Amersham, for instance, it meant more, I think, to people like me who are in favour of planning reform than it did to the Conservative Party.
Jacqui, got your name right.
Thank you. I mean, I agree with everything apart from Emma's comment about Keir Starmer.
That peerage is still dangling, isn't it?
Yeah. But, I mean, the point here is, and we were sort of touching on this earlier on, Boris Johnson is an immensely lucky politician. Even were there to be a by-election loss, I'm not sure it would be the end of him. And equally, Keir Starmer has been a very unlucky politician. Let's not forget, it was pretty difficult to be the leader of the opposition during the course of the pandemic. Just as the pandemic was ending and Labour was beginning to set their stall out and Keir Starmer was getting a bit more recognition, we then find ourselves in a position where the war in Ukraine starts, and on the whole, rightly, I think, the opposition have tended to lay off the Prime Minister whilst that's been happening.
So what would you rather have, a lucky politician or an unlucky politician? Because going into an election, lucky politicians often do rather well.
I'd rather have a lucky Labour politician if that's on the table.
Well, everyone's luck runs out on the end, and you know that. Yeah, you read your Greek tragedy.
Who was it who said nothing is forever? No, let's leave that one. Right, Khalid, thank you very much for your question. Let's move on to Annie in Carnforth. Hello, Annie.
Hello, Iain and panel.
Hi.
Hi. Me and my partner are disabled pensioners, and today our pensions and disability benefits went up by 3.1%, and inflation is at 6.2% and forecast to go up to 9 or 10% later on in the year. And the Tories promised in their manifesto that they would keep the triple lock on pensions, which they've ditched this year. Do the panel think that the government are doing enough to help people with the cost of living crisis?
Annabel.
No, I don't think the government is doing enough to help you with the cost of living crisis. I think for a start, it ought to have indexed linked welfare benefits to inflation at the spring statement. I don't think that there should have been any increase in national insurance contributions on both the employee and the employer side. The latter is often forgotten about, but it acts as a disincentive to job creation, really affects people who are not in work, particularly young people and some women as well. And it's not doing anything to try and tackle the government interventions that have driven up the cost of living for a lot of people. So if you look at the energy and security strategy that came out last week, there was a lot of longer term planning around nuclear and renewables, but still no real encouraging signs on ending the moratorium on fracking. And if we want to bring down energy bills, then that would be the quickest way of doing it. So no, I don't think the government is taking the cost of living crisis seriously enough. It's not bringing in the sorts of measures that are going to drive it down. And, people, unfortunately, in the next 12 months many people in the next 12 months are going to feel poorer than they do today.
Jacqui Smith.
No, I don't think the government is doing enough. The Rishi Sunak's spring statement, of course, happened at a time when it was clear that we're going to face the biggest hit in living standards this year than we have done for very, very many years in the sort of living memory of very many politicians. And the proposals that he put forward were simply not up to the task. The important point, I think, about the fact that, he could very easily, at the least, have reinstated the uplift on universal credit and chose not to. He didn't find other ways to support people who are clearly facing real terms decreases in their living standards at the moment. And that's part of the reason why the shine has gone off him. But more importantly, it's part of the reason why people across the country are having such a difficult time at the moment.
Emma?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with basically everything that's been said thus far. I don't think the government have done nearly enough in any sense of the word, whether that be food prices, whether that be fuel and energy, whether that be benefits and pensions. I think it's absolutely horrendous that in 2022 we are seriously, people like Martin Lewis of Money Supermarket, who is now a campaigner as well as, is having to issue advice on his website about heating the human, not the home, that we are in this position where people literally are going to have to, wear blankets, and people talking about wrapping themselves in electric blankets at their desk rather than being able to heat their homes. I think that, I've spoken to so many kind of pensioners and people who've called into various radio shows who are talking about, at the end of the week, I've only got less than £10 after my... It's absolutely horrendous, and the government can do more and they should do more.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I think it's quite telling, isn't it, that we have a panel of left and right people and we all seem to agree on this, and that's a danger for the government. And I suppose we have to remember as well that this cost of living crisis is coming at the end of a series of economic shocks, sort of COVID, the B word, and obviously the longest stagnation in wages in sort of living memory. And on top of that, we now have, sort of this new massive crisis, and the government is if you look at what Sunak was announcing in the spring statement, 5p reduction in petrol, which obviously disappeared in a second, as sort of a 1p income tax, not so much jammed tomorrow as, sort of maybe a sort of a morsel in 2 years' time. It made no political sense whatsoever, while, refusing, say, a £500 rebate, for example, on energy bills, which are going through the roof. And so obviously they need to do more, universal credit, not only reinstating the uplift, but increasing it further. As you said, Annabel, sort of, indexing welfare is, an excellent idea I could completely support. Cutting scrapping the national insurance rise, just basic things they could do, along with having the windfall tax on energy companies. All this stuff they could do, which they're choosing not to do. And I think it's very short-sighted from their perspective, because people will, at the next election, look at their pocketbooks, they'll look at their wallets and see that they are living a lot less comfortably than they were, and a lot more people are going to be in poverty, and the only people they can blame for that will be the government, justifiably.
And it's not just looking at their pocketbook or looking at their bank statements. It's feeling it, it's living it, isn't it? It's absolutely feeling that. It's funny how their partner's income gets taken into account and their universal credit gets cut. But for some reason, the Chancellor's wife, her income...
it's fundamentally about fairness, isn't it?
It's about fairness, and it's about quality of life. Yeah. Of course the deficit matters. Of course it does. And, yes, the big money matters, but people matter as well. And it seems that the government are saying, actually, people don't matter, but we've got to
Well, yeah, but
we've
I mean,
got to fill up the coffers.
Right, exactly. And 2 years ago, we saw that when push comes to shove, when the government needs to magic up money, the magic money tree actually does exist because there was unlimited funds to help people during COVID, and people need help now. So why isn't that help coming?
Well, they're not doing that because
surely, just to play devil's advocate here, surely just because the magic money tree did exist for COVID, you can't keep shaking it forever and ever. Otherwise, you get a basket case economy.
But at the moment, we are in a moment of crisis. It's a perfect storm.
But that's not true, Ian, because if people have more money in their pockets, they then stimulate the economy.
We've got
If they are able to spend.
We've seen some pretty disappointing growth figures today, Ian, actually. So it's not the case that the way in which the Chancellor is currently running the economy is successful.
I did so as playing devil's advocate.
I know you did.
Well, can I come back on a couple of
Annabel, Annabel will
the
be a
growth
proper
figures
devil.
weren't actually too bad today, and they're certainly not as bad as a lot of people are making out. If you take out the NHS test and trace and the vaccine programme, it grew 1.1% in February, which is more than the OBR was forecasting for the first quarter. So I think I would just bear that in mind. As in terms of the money printer that's been whirring at the Bank of England over the last couple of years, the massive increase
since 2007, you mean?
Well, particularly in 2020 and to a lesser extent in 2021, the massive increase in the supply of money that we saw over the coronavirus pandemic is in large part to blame for the fact that we now have inflation set to hit the high single digits. So I think we've got to be very wary of believing the MMT, the modern monetary theory dream, or buying into the modern monetary theory dream that we can just continue to print and print and print more money so that we can afford everybody the sort of lifestyle that they want, because it does come with very serious consequences. And this is a problem that the Chancellor himself is facing.
We're not even
very
talking about a
lifestyle.
lifestyle. We're not talking about a lifestyle. We're talking about people's basic needs.
But that's inflation.
We're talking about
people having less disposable income, less purchasing power, and that is in large part to blame. The situation that we have is in large part to blame because of inflation.
No, I was just going to make a point about inflation, that it's even more significant, isn't it, that this is not demand-driven largely inflation. This is cost-push inflation that has come from increases in fuel prices, which need to be ameliorated if people aren't going to be finding themselves in the sort of position that they are at the moment.
It is demand-led or supply, a lack of supply. If you have, everybody, the economy of the whole world got back on its feet at roughly the same time. So therefore, there was a huge amount of demand for some products, and the supply wasn't there. No, but my argument is this is not an inflation that is being caused by either government fiscal or monetary policy. It's largely being caused by increases in costs, whether or not from Brexit or from fuel increase.
Well, also in putting the country into lockdown for 2 years, completely unnecessarily.
We've done so well to get to 8:47 without the Brexit word having been mentioned, particularly given Jonathan is on the panel. It's 8:47.
LBC, Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Weekday mornings from 7.
Boris Johnson's trip to Kyiv. Andrew in Kensington, been an absolute triumph for the British government and the British Prime Minister.
It achieved nothing. No sane leader of a major country goes to the war zone. The visit has been vetted by the Russians.
No, that's nonsense. That's it, I think. I think that's a red card. You win the award, that's the biggest pile of nonsense for April. You are the worst caller of the month. What is it, April the what? 11th. You've won the award as the dopiest caller of the month.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC.
Having a
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
9 minutes to 9 on LBC. Everyone's awaiting our fun text at the end of the programme. That seems to have become a bit culty. We have Jacqui Smith, Emma Woolf, Annabel Denham and Jonathan Liss with us answering your questions. And the next one is from Chris in Richmond. Hello, Chris.
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. Should we be concerned if Marine Le Pen becomes Madame le Président in a couple of weeks' time?
Emma.
I think we should be concerned, yeah. Obviously, I think Macron should be even more concerned about his disaster yesterday. I think there's a real sense of anger and betrayal and dissatisfaction and alienation amongst the French people. And they protest properly, they do it properly. They're not going to take this lying down. I think Marine Le Pen should be pretty happy with her performance thus far. Probably she won't make it, but I think that already she's had a huge surge in the polls, and it's already a victory for her. I think that European leaders will be nervous about this. The increasing surge towards populism and the votes for the extreme left and the right were notable. But I think this is a profound rejection of what Macron stands for, and he came to power promising to do things differently, and instead we have just exactly the same. I think French people feel they have just more of the sort of Élysée elitism.
Jacqui, you were very enamoured with Emmanuel Macron, but slightly less so nowadays, I feel.
Slightly less. I mean, clearly I would have voted for him had I been in France. And Emma, it's not true to say that what happened to him yesterday was a disaster. In fact, he had the best performance of an incumbent president since Mitterrand in 1988. So, and I suspect will win in a fortnight when the second round arrives. But to answer the question, yes, I think it would be a disaster if Marine Le Pen became the next French president. It would turn France into an insular, unwelcoming, backward country, and not one that I would want to be living next to.
Jonathan.
I'm no fan of Macron, but I think he actually did quite well yesterday, considering he kind of increased his first round percentage from 5 years ago. I think there are a lot of things to say about the election. It's obviously very worrying that 30% of the population voted for far-right candidates. That's horrifying. It's extremely concerning for centre-left and centre-right parties that, the Gaullists and the Socialists, who polled over 50% a few years ago, now polled 7% between them. That is extraordinary as well. What it means for centre-left and centre-right parties in Europe. But I think that Macron will win it, but by a much slimmer majority than he did 5 years ago, and that's very concerning about the direction that France is taking. Yes, we would be extremely concerned if Marine Le Pen won. It would be on a European equivalent of Trump winning the 2016 US election, which was obviously horrifying in lots of ways and did, sort of cause several earthquakes for the next 4 years. So that would be awful for France and awful for Europe. And so, I don't like Macron as a politician. I don't like his policies. I don't like his style or manner. But clearly, he needs to win, and Europe should get behind him, and he does. But I don't think there's anything to celebrate in this election.
Annabel.
Yes, really echo what everybody else has said there. It would be alarming if Marine Le Pen won this election. She is isolationist, she's protectionist, she's described as far right, but actually that's quite an unhelpful description of her. If you look at a lot of her economic policies, actually as it happens, I think that a lot of what Macron did for the French economy has been quite good, which is why its GDP is now just edged over pre-pandemic levels. He implemented labour market reforms that incentivised hiring and so on and so forth. So I think it would be very problematic. What I would say is that it will be very tight. I imagine it'll be about 52-48 in Macron's favour. And because there's this realignment taking place in France, just like the one we saw here in Britain that led to the B word in 2016, the divisions are now on cultural lines rather than economic lines. It's nationalism versus cosmopolitanism. And I think that this could pave the way for Marine Le Pen's niece to come in 5 years' time with potentially a landslide. But certainly, at least in the short term, I think we're looking at 5 more years of Emmanuel Macron.
Madam Editor on Twitter says, Jacqui Smith just said everything I was thinking with regards to the French election. Absolutely spot on. Said no one ever. Let's move on, Chris. Thank you very much. Morgan in Conway in Wales has a question. Hello, Morgan.
Hello, Ian. You're right, everyone on the panel. So 2 years down the line now since he became Labour leader, does the panel think that Keir Starmer is the modern day Neil Kinnock, or do they think he's the Ed Miliband version 2?
Or Tony Blair, I suppose you
They
could
both
say.
lost.
Well, exactly. That's not a very good choice, is it?
Just to add another text onto this question, which you can feel free to answer if you wish. Keir Starmer has suggested Jeremy Corbyn won't be getting the Labour whip back. Is he right? And will that mean a new MP for the good people of Islington North? Annabel, let's start with you.
I think he's more of an Ed Miliband 2.0 to the first question. I'm just not convinced that he's going to be leading the Labour Party into the next general election. Now, there may be a lack, as there now is with the Conservative Party, of oven-ready popular candidates to take his place, but it's undeniable now that he lacks the charisma and lacks the policy underpinning, I think, in order to win in 2024. I think it's the Conservatives to lose rather than Keir Starmer's to win. And the second question, what will it mean for the good people of Islington North? Well, I think given Jeremy Corbyn's majority, it'll mean another Labour MP for the foreseeable.
Jonathan.
I mean, charisma is overrated. I mean, Donald Trump was charismatic for a lot of people. Joe Biden isn't particularly. So Boris Johnson is charismatic for a lot of people. You know, charisma can be too exhausting, too exciting and entertaining quite often in politics. And sometimes you need someone who's going to be dependable. Look, I don't find Keir Starmer... Thank you for that. Keir Starmer is not an inspiring leader. Like, I'm on the left. You know, I would love to see more left-wing policies. I hope that he does go towards that. But obviously, he's trying to be a bit Blairite in sort of being as right wing as his party will allow him to be, because he thinks that the centre ground is where elections are won. We'll see if that is correct. But obviously he has a lot to prove. I think he's done a lot better. He's improved a lot since he came into the position. He's enjoying healthy poll leads, which have been sustained over a period of some months now, even during the Ukraine war. And so I think that he has a very good chance of making it to the next election. And actually, frankly, he has a good chance of winning it, particularly if Johnson stays in position, because the public, as we were saying earlier, does not think highly of him. So I wouldn't write off Starmer at all. I would like him to be bold. I'd like him to sort of get his teeth stuck into things. He was very impressive in the Partygate thing. And I think that he still has a lot that he can offer.
Emma?
I'm afraid I disagree. I think Keith Starmer is completely lacking charisma. I think he's very, very bland. I don't think he resonates at all with British people. And I absolutely don't see him winning the next election. Whether Labour keep him on to lead him into the next election, well, that's their decision. I just can't believe there isn't anyone more inspiring who could be leading the Labour Party.
So, Jacqui Smith, Neil Kinnock or Ed Miliband 2.0?
Well, as I'm the second oldest member of this panel, after you, Ian,
only by 3 months.
A little bit of political history. I mean, I have a massive amount of respect for Neil Kinnock, because Neil Kinnock essentially made the Labour Party electable again in the 1980s and paved the way for John Smith, who sadly, of course, died, and then Tony Blair to take Labour into government. Ed Miliband, much as I like Ed, of course, didn't do the same. I think there is a chance that Keir Starmer... I don't think Keir Starmer will be replaced before the next general election. I think, given some of the momentum that he was getting before, as I said, the Ukraine situation slightly distracted the opposition, meant that he was putting himself in a position where Labour could win the next election. If he isn't successful in doing that, then he is much more Neil Kinnock, because I think he will very much have paved the way to making Labour electable again, which it hasn't been for a long time.
And guess who's sitting down with Neil Kinnock for over an hour on Wednesday for an All Talk podcast?
Is it you, Iain Dale?
Funnily enough, it is. Right, let's move on to our final text. It's from Ailsa in Hampshire. For the many podcast fans know what Ian and Jacqui will be doing this time next week. But what are the rest of the panel's plans for the evening of Easter Monday? Just to clear up any unfortunate gossip that might be promulgated by that text, Jacqui and I are doing a live podcast on the Magic Mike stage at the Hippodrome.
The Magic Mike? Is that the streeters?
With Wes Streeting.
Yeah.
Are you all getting your kits off?
No, we all hope Wes is.
Unfortunately, Jonathan, you would have to come to find out, but it's sold out within 36 hours. So, next Easter Monday evening, Emma, what will you be doing?
I am doing an Easter egg hunt thing on Easter Monday with my baby boy.
Lovely.
As you should be. Annabel?
I will also be doing Easter egg hunts with my children who are 5 and 3-year-old twins. So I imagine that next Monday evening I'm going to be trying to wrangle with them, negotiate
5 and 3-year-old twins.
18 months old.
Thoughts and prayers.
Thank you.
Jacqui, no, we know what you're doing. Jonathan?
I will be strutting myself on the dance floor on Sunday night and sleeping it off on Monday.
It's not a sight
If you
any
need
of us
any
wish
dance.
to
Well, I mean,
encounter.
speak for yourself.
Right. We will move on in the next hour. Thank you to you all, Jonathan, Jacqui, Annabel and Emma. You'll all be invited back at some point very, very, very soon. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to talk about teachers and why half of teachers plan to leave the profession within 5 years. Are you one of them? Give me a call, 0345 6060 973. What are the challenges that face modern-day teachers that have led so many of you to think, you know what, I don't want to do this job anymore? It's 9:02.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, a 26-year-old Islamic State group supporter has been found guilty of murdering the Conservative MP Sir David Amess in Essex in October last year. Ali Harbi Ali stabbed him more than 20 times with a 12-inch